Okay, evening all on Play Chess and streaming to YouTube. Hi there. I hope the preview screen is okay. It should be okay. In a few seconds I'm going to check on my preview. Board seems okay to me. A little bit different from before maybe, but I think is the board acceptable? We go on? Should be. If you just let me know. Okay, audio good on Play Chess. We're all ready to go. So I've got some exciting games now. The Fischer Petrosian match, candidates final 1971. Let's see what happened in the next two games. So this installment. Right. So Tigran Petrosian. Actually, his middle name is Vartanovich. Did you know that? He kicked off with knight f3, and Fischer played classically now, occupying the centre actually with c5. And now we have a very hyper-modern style move from Tigran, playing with Fischer b3, maybe making a statement. If he could win this game with this opening, which is a bit odd, then he's trying to say, you know, maybe he's trying to say he's not reliant on so much opening theory. Fischer reacts classically. He takes more centre. He occupies more of the centre with d5. There's something about this position already. Often white is playing e3 and f4 sometimes for bishop b2 to get a grip on these dark squares. Is white playing in a risky manner here after bishop b2? The grip on e5 isn't so evident without a pawn on f4. Fischer actually plays now a move which tries to immediately just blunt this bishop. He plays actually f6. But was this playing into Petrosian's hands? Maybe Petrosian wants to put Fischer's pawns all on dark squares, this one here, with this next move, c4. And volunteering, closing up the bishop, of course. But there's a major upside here after d4. Potentially, in this position, it looks a bit grim, doesn't it? To have a bishop blocked in. You develop two pieces. Black hasn't moved a piece yet, but is setting up a pawn structure designed against this piece. But what is the upside for white from a positional perspective? Does anyone know? This is not a move question. If you have all the pawns like this, what does white want to do? Do you think, if the pawn's here? What would you say white's plan is later? I could mention it now. So yes, it looks as though this is like miserable. Why would white want to do this? But I think Petrosian has played like this before. You know, it's provocative play. He's fixing the opponent's pawns. And I think one key thing about this structure, let's see, d3, e5. Although the bishop's blocked in, if we can exchange off one day, I know it takes some doing, it seems, these bishops, then these light squares are all going to be a bit weaker. So if we can exchange off these guys later, I think that's like the main plan for white, to try and exchange off the light square bishop later. Black's pawns are all on dark squares. You've got adjacent light square weaknesses. So we'll see that e3 is played now. Knight e7, and this means actually this knight can actually go here to support some key squares from c6 if needed. So it's a little bit like a reverse, like Tarrasch defence in a way. It reminds me of that. Also, it reminds me a bit of a reverse King's Engine as well, with black having the space and central control. But we see now bishop e2, knight ec6, getting out of the way of this bishop. So the bishop can now go to e7 if needed. On d6, I would guess it's more of a target to something like this. If it was on d6, mind you, maybe it's okay as well. We see knight bd2. We're out. I think we're out of live book. In fact, I should have been checking live book when this game came out of it. There's actually 0 games from here. Just for those interested in the opening, let me just quickly check a live book. So this is a very unusual sequence, b3 already. d5, bishop b2, f6 quite unusual. Knight c6 is usually played. c4 was very unusual. Usually e3 was played here. So you can see that it's a provocation, this c4, to blunt the bishop. Essentially, it's quite a novel provocation. All right, so we have this position, knight bd2. We're out of book totally at move 8. Bishop e7, and both sides castle. And now we have e4, which actually binds the light squares a bit more. Immediately, let's put on a capitulator as well. I'll just make note of something here. That I think bishop g4 fails. Let's just check this. If black can't play this, right? Because knight takes d4. Little tactic. Although even this position is not totally terrible for black. This isn't terrible either. But no, there's no need to play bishop g4. Fischer actually plays a6. And with this, actually, it's showing a plan that maybe, like in the King's-Indian Defence, you'd really want to attack on the queen side. So playing for b5, this structure, is it so strong as it's apparent right now? Black wants to attack that structure, and maybe, to do that, to inflict some pain, this knight might come later to reinforce the attack if it goes to b6. And if we have a take, then we've got knight a4 potentially coming to a4. So that sort of thing is on the cards. We see knight e1, and white's got his own plan, exchange off these bishops. But black has got this queenside attack plan. So both sides are employing these plans now. b5, bishop g4, exchange off the light square bishops. Fischer's not too worried here. He actually does play bishop takes, queen takes, and even offers the exchange of queens. Because he'll be left actually with a comfortable position, I think, if the queens come off here. This is already, from an engine perspective, it likes black quite a lot here. If we take the queens off, this didn't happen. This looks extremely comfortable. And maybe, in fact, this bishop can slip into the dark squares like this. So Petrosian actually played queen e2. We have now knight d7, and the knight's very comfortably coming behind the pawns, potentially. So knight c2, rook b8. So already that the pressure is a little bit felt. bc has to be a concern, but with this knight here for a moment, it doesn't look as though there's a problem at the moment. Rook fc1, and we have this move queen e8 now. So some shuffling. Bishop a3, trying to provoke perhaps b4 to fix things down. Fischer is not tempted here. Bishop d6 is played. At the moment c5 seems quite secure, and if needed queen e7, if white's ever going to take on b5, it would seem to be with a big problem. If white ever takes on b5, it would seem this a file would be useful with a backward pawn on a2. Being a result. But let's have a look. Knight e1, and we see now an intriguing move here in the form of g6. So just visually, who would you prefer here, white or black? If you want to mention who you prefer, I won't wait too long. But this is at move 18. If you want to give your answer to move 18. So after g6, okay, so c takes was played actually, trying to maybe get something going on c5. But as I say, this a file must be a concern now after a takes. If black can get some pressure on the a file, bishop b2, and now there's knight b6. And one thing about this, it's as though thematically this c4, it's not possible at the moment. But imagine, if there was a build-up for c4, this would create a passed pawn. This would be then a passed pawn. If we inflicted c4 at some point, that would be a strong, central, protected passed pawn, which would make the tactics very favourable for black, or endgame transitions would be very nice potentially, if we have a strong passed pawn in the centre. And if white's left with the a pawn, that might not be as devastating as this pawn here. So these endgames might be interesting for black. Looking ahead, we see now knight ef3, some pressure now on a2, a3, and black now playing knight a5, so both knights are targeting this break c4. So some pressure on b3, which could be reinforced with queen f7, which could result in this passed pawn, as I say, leaving white with a passed a pawn but black with a passed d pawn. Queen d1, and Fischer mounts the pressure, queen f7. So method in the madness, everything's coordinating, it seems, so far for this c4, and it would be very difficult to ignore because it would be threatening c3, forking some pieces here. So Petrosian is faced with a horrible c4 threat right now. It would seem strategically devastation if that was allowed. He has to do something. He plays one of the top recommended engine moves, actually. Let's see the devastation if you don't believe it. Let's just play a non-committal move and allow c4. This is just horrible, isn't it? Takes. This is just swamped with the threat of c3. Doesn't look at all good. If we took here, knight 8 takes. What do we do about this? Say we do this. This is very, very comfortable for black. That nice, strong central passed pawn. It's not too dissimilar from the game. So anyway, in the game, a4 was played. And black delays the c4. He takes on a4 first, leaving white this pawn. And now plays c4 here. Yeah, the knights and the queen are all geared up for this break. Strategic break. This is one of the beauties about chess, how sometimes, you can witness really strong players. They build up all their pieces behind a thematic kind of strategic break, and it gives a fantastic flow of the game, as though it's based on the structural elements, the longer term elements of the position. But this is a thematic structural blow here, and it leaves white with a miserable looking endgame position as things start to get exchanged off now. But what does white do? He's faced with c3. This is horrible, isn't it? He takes on c4. Knight a takes, hitting the bishop, of course. A couple of knights come off. And now queen e2 to protect. There's also a bit of a provocative tactic in this position. It doesn't work. d3 doesn't work. We just take here. We've got d6. So it's not a problem. We just take on d6. Okay, so just rule that out. So no need for any tactic. Black is sitting comfortably on the position here. Has got some strategic trump cards. This bishop is lacking mobility still. The knight and bishop are coordinating on a3. It can't use this diagonal. Might like to. This pawn is blunting the bishop as well. But actually, having said all that the bishop's not so good, it's it's an interesting decision here. Can you guess? Maybe black could keep some positional pressure, but can you guess what Fischer played here? So black to play, I've said how miserable the bishop is, but black to play, if I gave you 20 seconds here to think about this. So it seems the knight's a beautiful piece. But what do you reckon Fischer did here? Any ideas? So black to play in this position. Yes, it's paradoxical. Maybe you might consider, it depends on your style of play, for some extra torture to keep tension in the game. There's a point where you have to sort of say, do you want to cash out or keep some more pressure going? I don't think this is such a bad move. If you said rook fc, I don't think that's such a bad move. It's actually the top engine choice. It keeps the pressure. But Fischer actually cashed out in a way. Knight takes b2. It's an interesting decision. Obviously more forcing to take the bishop. But if we keep the tension as well, this is also just pretty good for black. I suppose maybe there's a potential blockade. It still seems very comfortable for black, even if we have this knight on d3. This position, it's comfortable for black. But anyway, Fischer did take that bishop here. Knight takes b2, more forcing. So we have queen takes b2, a forcing move again. Queen a2. And now bishop b4. The bishop wants to install itself on c3. And maybe this is the point Fischer thought this endgame was pretty comfortable. White takes the queens off. So what do you think about this endgame? Rook c7 check, and the king just comes up here, offering, it seems, h7 for a moment. This might not be such a hot idea to take on h7. In fact, Petrosian played g4. He's a bit conscious of this back row. It's only the rook protecting the back row. If white took on h7, it seems bishop c3, and then what? We're taking this pawn next. So say something like this. We've got this nice passed pawn. Rook takes a4, and then maybe just double and drag this pawn down. That would be the idea. So you know, that's a bit controversial actually, to take on h7. So I think g4. It's not such a brilliant position though. It's technically already, it's great for black. g4 was played, and we have bishop c3 anyway. Okay, but the point is the rook can still protect the pawn now, because white's king can go to g2 now. So rook a2, but it's a miserable position surely. Rook c8, Fischer doesn't mind an exchange of rooks here, and again he seems to be offering this h-pawn, but there's a punishment here again in this particular position. If this was played, then it seems, you know, d3 is pretty strong, with ideas like rook c4, and you know, maybe the pawn seems really strong. How does this rook ever get back to help the fellow rook? You know, something like this as an example. Rook c6, rook c4. This is starting to look miserable, this position. Maybe we can just take here actually. So yeah, the rook doesn't want to take on h7 particularly. He actually took on c8. Rook takes c8. And now, in fact, a5 was played. And there's a choice. Do we go after this pawn, or do we maybe try and play for f5? Because we could try and get two connected passed pawns. If we undermine this guy, we've got two connected passed pawns. f5 might actually be a really strong move here as an alternative to rook a8. Fischer chose rook a8, which is another very strong move. But maybe, you know, technically, if we were looking at this really critically, this game, f5 is just mega dangerous as well. This position, because we've got the two connected passed pawns. But it just shows black's already got a big advantage, it seems. There's different ways of playing this position. But rook a8, putting pressure, encouraging the pawn forward. Now blockading here, rook a7. So black now has got that fixed target. If he can just get his king over here, he can munch this pawn, as an example. King f1. And now Fischer doesn't want to do this but worry about g5, so he actually plays g5 himself, fixing this, limiting white's resourcefulness, because g5 might have been a useful undermining move for this pawn chain. So the knight's a little bit cramped here. It can't actually move without maybe taking and just taking here. So let's just make sure knight d, we just take here, yeah, and that would be horrible. So the knight's kind of restricted actually by the bishop. I think if knight e1, maybe black does just take here as well and just goes for that pawn. So the knight's kind of restricted. King e2 was played. King d6, as though the king's like coming in, or to support the pawn, maybe this way to support this pawn. It's dangerous as well. King d3, king c5. Well, the king is protecting c4 here against king c4 from black. Knight g1. Okay, as if knight e2 is going to be interesting. Now king b5, going for this pawn here. Knight e2. Now, interesting. Do we take this pawn on a6? Fischer didn't actually. He played bishop a5, which actually might be one of the strongest moves. If rook takes a6, we just take here actually, and then we just take there, and that's equal. Now we don't want to lose that pawn. No, that would be careless. The bishop just moves back. Yes, the king is on c3, so bishop just moves back. Now we have this check. So the king takes the pawn there. So pawn up. Rook b1. Now rook c7, seizing that c file. Again, this knight's a bit miserable because now if the knight moves, there's something like rook c3 check. Will be nasty. So we have rook b2. So Petrosian's in a miserable position here, pawn down. But now we have bishop e1, encouraging these pawns to move forward a bit, f3. And now king a5, as though this king might be coming down like this. Rook c2. Black could have taken here. I think that's still an advantage for black. But we have rook b7 instead. So rook b3 check, maybe trying to get this pawn down. Check, check, bishop blocks, rook a2, rook c7 again, rook a1, bit manoeuvring, rook c8, waiting around, but inviting actually this rook to come to the 7th rank here, and it does, and closes the rook out now of the queen side with bishop a5, so the rook's not coming back down. Rook d7, bishop b6, and closes again that a7 square. So now this bishop's protecting that pawn, and maybe this rook can come down. So interesting position here. Check, bishop c5, knight c1, as though knight b3 is a menace. Black takes knight b3 away from white, king a4, the king protects this square. Rook d7, as though maybe, you know, take here and then get the h pawn up. That's the plan. Bishop b4, hitting the knight immediately though. The knight moves. And now king b3, infiltration with the king. So now, in fact, rook c2, rook d2 would be checkmate if you look at that position. The pawn would be part of a mating net there. So rook c2 is a big threat here to handle. So we have rook b7. So a little trap, of course, is set, which Fischer is not going to fall into. He's going to see this trap from miles off. But let's just, you know, he actually played rook a8 here, but I can see that there's a little trap here myself, so that's how obvious the trap is. What would white play in this position if rook c2 was played? White to play here. This didn't happen. What would white play in this position? Any ideas? Actually, it's just an awakeness test. It's not a major tactic or anything. It is a winning tactic, which I'm sure you can all guess. I'm hoping you all guess. Yeah, just rook takes b4 would be a nasty. Yeah, okay. I'm just testing if you're awake. Well done. So no, Fischer plays rook a8. So we're back to this thing. There's going to be an infiltration here by the a file, it seems. That would be pretty painful as a mating net as well. In the meantime, can taking here and doing that do anything? Isn't white going to get mated? Let's see now. This transaction about to happen. The pawn is taken. The infiltration happens. We're threatening a mate in 1. White has to sacrifice the knight. There's no other way, it seems. White's in a mating net, faced with a mate in 1. He sacrifices the knight. It's check. So he gets a couple of pawns there. Remember, he got a pawn there, so it's 3 pawns. Well, he won 3 pawns, but he's actually only 2 pawns up, because black was already a pawn up. So white is 2 pawns for the bishop. But isn't this just technique for Fischer with the bishop? Check, check, rook h1. Now after h4, here's another interesting thing. Would you be tempted? I think this is probably winning as well. Maybe everything's winning here. No, this might not be. But would you be tempted for rook takes h4? Anyone tempted for rook takes h4? Let's have a look. So this is a critical position. No, black is totally like winning this. Black's totally winning this, but he's got to be careful in this position actually. So black to play. What would you play here? Let's raise the stakes. So if you play a good move here, I'll give you like 200 points. If you play a bad move, you lose 1,000 points. So black to play here. What would be a good move for black? Any ideas? A good move for black. Yes, the bishop's on the wrong colour actually. The bishop is not the same colour as that square. So actually this would be a disaster. It'll be equal, takes. We just need to dissolve the pawns, f4. If we dissolve this pawn, this king just installs itself here and we've got the wrong colour bishop. So this is just equal, this position. We dissolve the pawn, this pawn, and then it's a draw, yeah? We just crawl back to h1 and never go away. That's a draw, isn't it? So, no, we don't want to do that. But actually, in this position, I think g takes is technically winning, apparently. But Fischer actually wanted to try and get a mating net. He played king c4, leaving this tension here. It's pinned anyway against the rook for a moment. But it gives white the opportunity to get this seemingly protected pass pawn. But he's a bishop up, and he makes use of that now. There's a mating net, check, forcing the king to the back row. Now king d3, and it's looking really bad. There's a mate in 1 threat now. So this is just totally a winning position with this mate in 1 threat. White's actually resigned here. If king f1, okay, this position we can win in all sorts of ways. We can just munch like this, munch all these pawns. Let's check. We start munching all the pawns. So yeah, white resigns here after this king d3. Now that's kind of a curious game because it seems as though Petrosian, was punished for kind of radical, hypermodern play in the opening. He allowed his bishop to be kind of blocked in. But, there's the funny moment in this game where, Fischer, despite having this bishop blocked in, he ended up, taking that bishop here. That was a funny moment. He sort of saw maybe this bishop was going to be better than the knight. So, these endgames are interesting to think about in advance. And then, this pawn's going to be rounded up, or there's going to be an infiltration. So I thought it was an interesting, strategically played game. I think it was instrumental in wearing down Petrosian in this match, this game. It was quite a long one, maybe a tiring one. So yeah, what did you think about this game? It's a curious opening by modern standards, knight f3, b3. But Fischer seemed to react really kind of well, with his f6 plan and blocking in the bishop. He seemed to react really well anyway, as far as I can see. I don't know what you think about that. So that was in game 6. So let's have a look now at game 7, shall we Can we have a look at game 7 now? Okay, so I'm going to put up game 7. So Fischer was playing white in game 7. e4. Petrosian plays the Sicilian. We have knight f3, e6. And just trying to get the name of this variation. Knight f3, e6, right, a6 now. Okay, so bishop d3 was played here, which is actually the top move in live book, bishop d3. Black chose knight c6, and white took on c6. Usually black takes actually with the d pawn here, it seems. There's over 500 games taken with the d pawn, because maybe later e5 and this bishop can come to e6 or something. But actually we have b takes c6, which leaves this bishop as a problem piece a little bit. Now Fischer castled. So he castled, and we have d5. And often players with white here, apparently they play knight c3. Apparently this is a very popular move, over 700 games. In fact, Fischer chose a much rarer move, c4. Just to give an example for those theoretically interested, this is the sort of well-trodden path you might expect. This is a well-trodden path. There's even 24 games from this position. So that's quite a well-trodden path there. But no, we get this, instead of knight c3, we get c4. And this might have some implications for isolating black's d-pawn, an isolated pawn. But there's a certain trade-off. It seems, you know, black's pieces are activated, the bishops are activated. So after knight f6, in fact, Fischer, you know, kind of liberates this bishop. But he's aiming for structure, and this e-file, he's going to give black an isolated queen's pawn. He takes on d5, and he takes again. Black really wants to free his bishop by taking like this, yeah, to give this bishop a free run. It doesn't. I don't think black wants. It doesn't look nice to take with the knight, but it is actually the engine choice to take with the knight. This might have been the more solid approach. It leaves black's structure okay if black can survive this. You know, this sort of position. If black can survive it, then maybe it's okay. You know, structurally, it seems, you know, e takes d5. We have this isolated queen's pawn now. The bishops look at, you know, like breathing okay, but this isolated queen's pawn must be a concern, surely, as the outcome here. It seems as though white has an advantage positionally. You have to argue the case though. So we have knight c3. And this is already interesting now. After bishop e7, I was curious why. Now we have this move queen a4 check, and black actually didn't play bishop d7. Black played queen d7, which looks almost provocative. On bishop d7, maybe this is a nice blockade. Queen d4, very nice blockade looking move. And what does black do about d5? That looks like a big problem here. This looks very comfortable against the isolated queen's pawn. In fact, Petrosian played queen d7, and it looks as though there's kind of a tactic here which I thought initially was interesting. Can you see the tactic I was concerned with? Why hasn't white got a certain tactic? So white's play. Do you see a certain tactic where it might be winning material in theory? So interesting, like, position here. If I gave you 20 seconds, can you see a tactical idea which I thought was interesting? It wasn't actually played. Maybe it's not so hot. Actually, it is the engine's second choice move. Well, it was for a moment the engine's second choice move, and now it's gone. But when I was playing through this game, I thought, you know, why not this tactic in this position? Interesting. Yes, Dimitri, or the a6 pawn is pinned, right? This tactic, bishop b5, why isn't this working? Well, let's have a look now. A takes, queen takes. Oops, no, not there. Queen takes. Black's sacrificing the exchange. How much compensation is there? Does Black want a castle? Maybe d4. Yeah. No castle. Maybe there's a bit of counterplay here that Fischer didn't like. If Black gets some more moves, you know, things like bishop b7, dangerous. If we take here, it seems we've got a protected parcel. We've got bishop b7. This might be a concern later. Say like this. We've got a concern here. We've got d3. Is it holdable? I mean, maybe. Fischer didn't like this. Anyway, you can win the exchange. Fischer didn't like that. So what he played was actually in this position. He played actually a different move, which might actually be technically strong. The engine actually prefers this much more to Fish. 6 prefers Fischer's move. Funny enough, instead of winning material. You might think that's a bit curious. Maybe Petrosian is like really annoyed. Maybe this was some deep preparation here for this deep exchange sack for bishop b5. It was just bypassed. It's like, you know, what is this? Rook e1 was played. Just bypassing it. But this is really annoying, this move. It stops Black castling, doesn't it? If Black castles here, doesn't he just lose a piece? White just takes here. Then he takes on e7. Thanks very much. So we get an endgame kind of transition where we get the queens coming off. Because Black's pretty tied down here in this position. And yeah, maybe this is now even stronger. So, you know, Black actually took on a4. So we have knight takes a4. And there's a few things to positionally notice here. Alright, we've got this 2-to-1 pawn majority structurally, but also it seems Black is sensitive on some dark squares. So if we manage to like exchange off these two, then a knight on c5 would be pretty good. The isolated queen's pawn supports an outpost potentially, but maybe f3 would suppress that advantage of the isolated queen's pawn. So Black potentially could be left with two, well, giving White two potential trump cards here. The 2-to-1 pawn majority, but also a lovely knight on c5 against the bishop. This configuration could be good, with a knight and bishop being better than these two. If these two pieces end up being better than these two, there's a endgame considerations here. This pawn, the square adjacent to it, is critical. Black plays bishop e6, and Fischer does inflict this plan now. He wants to exchange off these two. He plays bishop e3, and it seems you might think this is nothing chess. Why is this kind of form of chess so, you know, polite? It's positional play. It's really putting White in a great position positionally to sort of, for tactics later, to be really quite nasty. If we end up with a knight on c5, then we've got pressure all around the shop. We can increase our e-file pressure, and this is the plan. Fischer aims to exchange off these dark square bishops, and there's nothing Black can do about it. He's actually skewered against the rook, so he's just waiting for those bishops to be exchanged off here. Bishop takes, and now a supported knight as well on c5. So we're ending up with this configuration, this knight and bishop versus this knight and bishop. But White's e-file is also kind of annoying here, as well as this measly pawn has been fixed down. So it's not just the 2-to-1, it's not just this configuration, it's this a6 pawn which is an issue here as well. So that has to be nannied right now with a whole rook, and Black actually gets into ridiculous contortions just with his a6 pawn if nothing else, as you're about to see, king f8, knight c5, torture. In fact, the king is supporting e7, so this can now move back just to support a6. You can feel the positional strain. Black's just about, doing this, but what miserable pieces are resulting here. And in fact, instead of even like taking the rook here, which might free black a bit, no, we just have this positional move f3, depriving any activity, and saying to black, look, this is an active piece. Do you really want to exchange this off and leave this, totally miserable position? Black has to keep active here, surely. But we get a ridiculously weird passive looking move here. If black did play rook takes e1, this is just very, very nice, just positionally for white. I'm pretty sure you can get tactical ideas going as well to try and break black up here. It's just a dominating position, but Petrosian, he keeps that rook on with this ridiculous looking move. Can you guess it? Black to play. In fact, I think it's going to be really hard to guess. Can you see what Petrosian played in this position? Now, he was a former world champion. He's a great player in his own right, a fantastic player in his own right. So Petrosian to play. It's a miserable position again. What do you think he played here? I don't know how many of you might have seen this game before. It wasn't knight g8, so this is a very hard to guess move actually. Oh, okay, I thought it was. Maybe I gave it away. Maybe you've seen the game before. Possibly knight d7 is one of the stronger moves actually. But actually Petrosian's move was rook e to a7. Yes, it's a mysterious rook move, doubling the rooks behind the miserable weakness a6. Saying to white, well, okay, come and get me. Yeah. Okay, how does Fischer come and get Petrosian here? We see this move rook e5, putting some pressure on that d5 pawn. So that also ties down the knight. Clearly, surely it ties down the knight because we could just take on d5, right? So it ties down the knight. White can also prepare to double rooks, yeah? Or maybe just gain space or bring the king towards the centre. Maybe even towards the blockade square. But black plays bishop d7 now. And the idea is actually revealed of doubling rooks here. The ingenious threat in this position, if you can call it, is what with bishop d7? What is black actually positionally threatening? Black is threatening what? Let's respect Petrosian's play as well. So what is black actually threatening in this position, which justifies actually doubling the rooks? Because otherwise you would never remember this game if you couldn't see this like logic. Oh, sorry, the training mode. Oh, sorry, on play chess. Okay, the training mode. I think that might confuse me. Sorry, that might really confuse me. So what is black positionally threatening? Can you just move away to a different tab yourself? On play chess, please change tab yourself away from notation tab. Black with the doubled rooks is actually threatening bishop b5, yeah. Because then, taking, then they're totally justified then on a2. But it's an interesting decision. Do you remember that previous game where Fischer did that mysterious cashing out? There's conflicting stories in chess. Do you want to maintain the tension? When do you cash out the position to end up, playing some forcing moves? And here is another, very difficult, decision, perhaps, because this knight looks so fantastic. But do you remember that other, the previous game? Fischer had a fantastic looking knight. So what does he do here now? White's play. What would you do here? Would you try and keep the tension going in the position? Would you like double rooks? That's tempting, isn't it? To just double rooks. Is that such a big deal? Do you just move your bishop back? What would you do here with white? You could try and actually prevent it with a4. That might actually be a strong move actually as well. I think it's a strong position, but it's interesting that Fischer approaches it simplistically actually. He doesn't keep the tension. Maybe a lot of players would actually keep the tension, you know, and just prevent black's threat here, positional threat. A4 is the top engine choice. It wasn't played actually. It would seem logical because also you could argue the 2-to-1 pawn majority. You know, if A5, B5, isn't this really horrible? Probably it is actually, but this didn't happen actually. Instead, Fischer took now that bishop. He took it off. It's a very simple way of playing the position. Just taking off here. Rook takes d7. His 2-to-1 is not going anywhere. Rook c1, he seizes that c file. And now immediately there's actually a tactical threat here. White has actually got a tactical threat that black must immediately parry. Can you see what is white threatening? It's very important to see the threats when you look over a master game to get the empathy for the issues that they saw and had to react to. So every time, you know, when you it's very, very useful to check for the threats. So what is white threatening here that black had to parry in this position? Can you see? Yeah, okay. Bishop takes a6, because if takes, we have, you know, back row issue, check, and we're going to be mating. So rook d6 protected a6, but relinquishes the 7th rank. So we pounce onto the 7th rank now. So black's starting to feel the pressure. If white's given another move, ouch, f7 is going. So knight d7, blocking, you know, king's now on e7. The rook drops back. Okay, so black's in a difficult position. He plays actually g6, and we have the king coming towards the centre a bit. We have that h5. Now let's move f4. So white's got a lot of pressure. This knight's kind of pinned in a way. If it ever moves, then just rook e7, right? So white seems to have very strong positional trump cards in this position. The rook's kind of stranded as well. If it ever moved, then surely a6 drops. Let's just check that. Rook e8. I think we just take, and then we just take not a6, pardon me. a6 is kind of dropping with rook a7. Nevertheless, it looks miserable, this position. The king can come here and be a menace in this position. So that's to be avoided. Rook e8. We have actually the move h4 being played by Petrosian, but he's suffering positionally. King f3. And I don't know if he's in a sort of not a zugzwang. Surely he's not in some sort of zugzwang. But his next move is very committal indeed. Petrosian's next move was actually f5. And I wonder if we can play this position without committing another pawn. That was the move played. If we try engine suggestion, knight b6. I think this is difficult. Here. White's actually got g4 here, threatening g5, for example. This is going to get nasty. Whoops. If hg, we're still threatening kind of things like g4 here. It looks nasty, this position. Yeah, it looks as though black's going to be losing material. So anyway, yeah, this committal move f5 in this position was played, so weakening a bit more this 7th rank. How does white actually try and make use of the 7th rank here? Well, actually the king now cheekily steps in with king e3, funny enough. If it can, the king can go to d4, that's really quite powerful there on d4. So this is a magnificent king blockade scenario. Petrosian actually stops that. That does seem to be a legitimate major threat, king d4, in this position. For example, okay, if knight d4 is actually played to stop that. If knight f6, king d4, then white has this one. If, say, knight e4, this is just very pleasant. Something like this. Yeah, the king's a real attacking piece potentially. It's to be avoided by black, this sort of position. So black played d4 check. King d2. And yeah, there's still a huge amount of pressure. It seems, you know, now bishop c4 is striking across the whole diagonal. This d4 is no longer controlling c4. The bishop would love to go there, surely, on c4. We have actually knight b6. Okay, stopping the bishop c4 for a moment. But now the rooks go to the 7th. Is the point that they're forked? Well, it's not such a big deal here. Fischer throws in a check to get out of the fork. And now moves the other one. And, okay, he's got a pawn hanging here. But what is actually black doing in this position? White wants to just play rook h7, rook h8, just mating. Yeah, just mating. It seems actually losing now, this position. Tactically, it seems the engine's suggesting rook b8. It's a tactical idea to try and do this. This would be maybe the best continuation. But even here, takes bishop c4. This is very nice. We can just get, I think, a winning ending transition like this. This is very nice. We've got a blockade. We've got 2-0. It's winning. But Petrosian's move is actually, well, it's lost. The position's lost. He plays knight takes f4. And this is a really incisive move now. You might think, well, rook h7, but then maybe knight e6. If rook h7, I think knight e6, but even here, it's horrible for black. I think this is still winning with bishop c4. But even more incisive, instead of rook h7, bishop c4 immediately. So we're keeping this idea that we just want to play rook h7, rook h8, just mating. And it's here that Petrosian resigned. If he plays actually knight e6 here, I think this is just losing a piece actually, if nothing else. Check is actually winning a piece in any case, but it's just so winning, isn't it? Isn't this just winning as well? Maybe that's just winning as well. It's just, by this stage, it's just totally winning. It's just winning the rook over here. Yeah, it's a completely winning position after bishop c4 anyway. So here Petrosian resigned. But okay, there were some interesting decisions there. That was made to look kind of easy, but there were some interesting decisions to try and win an endgame configuration. That interesting first decision bypassed a lot of black's maybe preparation, counterplay. He didn't go for winning the exchange. It would be tempting, surely, for a lot of players to have played bishop b5 there. Would you agree? It was tempting, but it might have activated black a bit to give some chances. Fischer instead goes for simple, very simple, like, yes, domination in the endgame. He wants to get off the dark square bishops. He wants to torture the a6 pawn. So it's more than just having a nice visual knight. It was actually torturing this a6 pawn, the knight on c5. And forcing black's pieces all around a6 at one moment. It seemed horrible that we've got 3 major pieces all on behind a6. Ridiculous looking position. But then we have this other interesting decision here of, you know, we have this lovely looking knight on c5 and it's just taken off here. I think Fischer has to see that his king's going to be very nice on the dark squares with this decision. That blockade is actually very significant in an endgame, that blockade square. And there's a tactic here that has to be addressed. And then his rooks are really one to coordinate here. It's just very, very difficult for black to have played this. We didn't, if rook at e8, I think we just taken and let's have a quick look at that. I think we just take and we're just going to win a6 sometimes. So yeah, it was just a very, very difficult position where here black's getting kind of strangled positionally. Round about here, black is in a kind of virtual zugzwang, would you say? He's making some committal pawn moves that he doesn't want to do. You wouldn't think black wants to do this and this. He ends up doing both those pawn moves here, but it's such a difficult position with that rook on the 7th. So, and with this and this, I mean, it's clearly that the 7th rank is being weakened and the diagonal is being weakened with these 2 pawn moves. They're not going backwards. Pawns don't go backwards, as they say. So we get both of those, and it becomes, just as a minor inconvenience to get the rooks out of the fork, and a minor thing to sacrifice the pawn. The rooks on the 7th being the mating net is set up. It's a positional masterpiece. Yeah. I think it looks like a positional masterpiece, but it avoided black's counterplay early on with that offering of the exchange. It seems as though black didn't get much counterplay. Okay, I don't know what you think about these 2 games. I mean, I think they're both positionally, interesting games. And I think there are certain moments, about when to cash out, what are you actually getting. Is it so subtle what you actually get with some forcing moves? But it was enough to win, both games in the end. Infiltrations basically into the opponent's position. It seems that was the priority, to infiltrate with pieces. So there's a certain exchange at a certain point where Fischer's pieces were kind of aggressive looking, but he doesn't mind if it's going to lead to further infiltration. Okay, I hope you got something from this week. Thanks very much. See you next week. Comments or questions on YouTube.